You are listening to the e-flux podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the e-flux podcast. My name is Andreas. I'm the editorial assistant on e-flux Journal, and today I'm very happy to welcome Fiona Connor to the podcast. Fiona Connor was born in Auckland, New Zealand in 1981 and has lived and worked in Los Angeles since 2009. She studied at the University of Auckland Elam School of Fine Arts, completing a BFA, BA in 2004, and at California Institute of the Arts in 2011, where she did an MFA. Connor has developed projects for and is in collections of the Monash University Museum of Art, the Hammer Museum, Auckland Art Gallery, and the Dunedin Public Art Gallery. She has been involved with a number of artist-run spaces, including some that she co-founded, and programs in the United States, Australasia, and Europe, including the annual Varese Group Symposium. So just to start, I thought it would be interesting to go into the exhibition that you've recently put up at the SculptureCenter in Long Island City, Queens, which is actually where we met. And do you want to talk about it? It's in 3 different pieces, as you mentioned to me. Do you want to maybe introduce each section briefly and we could talk about them?
Yeah. So about a year ago, Sorab asked me to develop a project for the SculptureCenter. And from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to work closely with the site. And it's always a memorable thing visiting the SculptureCenter because you sort of pop out of the subway and you walk to the SculptureCenter, and it's sort of such a specific neighborhood that's going through so many changes.
Right.
So I knew that I wanted to have multiple visits and sort of like tease out the place. My project has these 3 parts. One takes the form of like an exhibition in the space. One is a permanent work in an apartment nearby, and the other is an artist book.
Well, all 3 are super generative for conversation.
They're all very different.
Yeah. Well, we could start. I'd love to talk about all 3 if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
The first one, which is really interesting and totally riffs off the title Closed for Installation. And it's, as far as I understand it, is a series of bronzes that you produced with a foundry in Los Angeles of items that would be found in a space before an exhibition is installed. So tape measures, hammers, coffee cups, things like this.
Yeah. So there's this thing when you are involved with exhibition making that like you do the install, and it's this very collective time of museum staff and the artist and whoever, and it's quite chaotic, and the gallery's full of stuff. And then there's this funny moment where it gets cleaned, and then the public are allowed to enter, and it's more formal. So the piece, Closed for Installation, is as if the tools were left behind, but all the tools are cast in bronze. And it's quite like that's like a sort of a simple premise, but the way that the tools were then cast became about work in itself, because I worked with these 3 different foundries that all like have different ways of casting, different approaches, and it was quite an involved, and like I learned so much about bronze.
I can only imagine.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to think about this piece in connection. You know, you studied at Cal Arts in LA, and obviously there's a history of West Coast conceptualism that definitely comes out of that school. And one work that I was thinking about when I was there from conceptual art is Michael Asher's piece at the Claire Copley Gallery in 1974, where he got rid of the dividing wall between the sort of the gallery office and the gallery space, and you sort of put the exhibition mechanisms on display. But what's interesting about this piece, it seems to me, is that not only do you kind of put it on display, but you freeze it, right? I mean, bronze is this sort of very evocative material for art history, but also it's the work that typically is invisibilized, and when the space is made sterile, when it's made into a white cube.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like gesture or that removal that Michael Asher did, it's one of my favorite pieces. There's this sort of, I don't know, there's like, when I imagine that piece, there's this kind of like warmth and access to something that's just in the space already. Totally. And like, that gets me excited that like within any space that you could, with long enough in it and observing that there is these things that you could access. But yeah, in Closed for Installation, I was interested in like making the objects or the tools robust, or like transforming them into a different material that like meant that they couldn't be erased.
Right.
That they would stand up, because in their new form to like sticking around. And like, that's interesting to me. Certain family members of mine are in exhibition design, or my family was in construction, and like it's this world that I really love inhabiting and working in. But it is an interesting thing when the building is done and it gets spoken about in terms of the architect, in terms of a building, or in an exhibition, an artist. And there's this kind of like, there's the story that is still part of the experience of the work, but maybe doesn't get foregrounded as much in terms of the way that the building is talked about.
Of course.
So I always sort of like to think that we can access those stories, and this is maybe just helping people get in there a bit. So yeah, the team at the SculptureCenter, they were really sweet when I was sort of like trying to collect things, and like I went for a site visit and came back with bits of cardboard and brooms and earplugs from the workshop. Right. It's slightly creepy. But yeah.
Well, I want to stay on this, but maybe we should come back to it after we talk about the other parts, because they all work together so well.
Right.
I don't know if I should say this, but I think the second piece, the window cleaning, is perhaps my favorite in terms of how it works. But rather than me describing it, could you tell us a bit about it and how you came to develop the piece?
Yeah, sure. So the second piece, which is called Number 4, is the annual window cleaning in an apartment in walking distance from the SculptureCenter. So every year in this, I think, nearly 100-year-old building, one of the apartments, all the windows will be cleaned. And we've changed the lease on the apartment, so when you move in, you're prepared for this like annual maintenance. And I guess sort of, there's a couple things that I find sort of like led into my thinking, was that like an old building, if you maintain it, it can still be a valued and like totally functional piece of real estate. Mm-hmm. And that also, like, that maybe like an artwork, it doesn't need to be about making an object, and like that the work is like sort of literally like clarifying the glass that you view outside. A pretty simple concept.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of interesting with in relationship to the bronze work, which is so much about like sort of a physical assertion. This is more about a removal.
Right. Right.
And a gift of that cleaning.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many ways to consider like this act of cleaning that happens. I mean, in terms of spectatorship, because, the people from the museums, as we talked about earlier, the museum's public is not invited to see this, right? The people who interact with it are the tenants, the landlord by way of the contract that sort of you've done, and the museum.
Yeah.
And I guess we can just see photos of these windows being very clean. Yeah. And it's, again, this form of like invisibilized labor that is then sort of made to make some place feel comfortable or sterile, et cetera. But what's also very interesting is you showed me earlier an artist book of a lot of works in this series that you've done where it's kind of coming into a space that's away from the typical space of display and doing something there that operates on this micro level. Could you maybe talk a bit about the artist book?
Yeah. So the artist book it's called Sequence of Events, and it's about a series of mostly permanent installations in apartments and homes. And I am really interested in like the home as a site of encountering and living with work, but maybe not like sometimes people associate that with like collectors. So I was not so much interested in collectors,
right,
but more, I guess, people that weren't collectors.
Right.
So
that small group.
Yeah. So the series actually, like, it's some of the apartments are artist-run spaces. Some of them are friends. Some of them are friends of friends. Or in this case, with the SculptureCenter piece, it's a connection with the institution.
Right.
So it's the landlord of the former director also has this other kind of old building that they connected us with. So, yeah. And I think something about the project that I find exciting is that these 10 works in apartments have these like loose affiliations to institutions,
right,
but they're actually like mostly located in homes.
Yeah.
Where the duration is very long, but the actual audience is kind of small.
Right. And to bring all of those different discourses that we just mentioned kind of quickly to the specificity of one apartment in sort of in one neighborhood in one part of New York. I mean, I remember when we talked for the first time on the phone after meeting each other, you mentioned that on the walk from the Court Square stop to the museum, or maybe you were getting off at Queen's Plaza, but in any case, on that walk, it's sort of so evident, the slow violence of displacement in that part of town, and it's been long in the making, at least 3 decades. But now you walk out of the SculptureCenter, which is this almost idyllic kind of post-industrial art space, and you're just surrounded by glass towers. There's very little sun if you're standing on a certain part of the street. And to take all those discourses and to pinpoint them in one specific apartment unit and one pair of tenants, or whoever takes over the apartment on the next lease.
Yeah,
there's something really beautiful about this term, mostly permanent, right? And maybe beautiful in like sort of a very almost scary sense. No.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit like a broken record because
Yeah.
the last time I did a podcast, I talked about Meryl Laderman Euclid, this artist who I love a lot.
Yeah.
And I want to bring it up in relation to this work, but maybe you should describe the third piece first because it also goes so well.
Oh, so actually you joined us over the weekend for the workshop, but the third piece is in place of the normal artist catalog. We're producing a an artist book where we're taking old printed matter from the institution, so old business cards and now like not useful postcards or whatever that are on their way to the recycling bin. So we're taking all this material and we shredded it and pulped it and reformed it into blocks, which are the same sort of dimensions of the normal catalogs. And we sort of invited people to come and do that as a group. And then the cover will be like screen printed on the object, all the participants that helped make them. It's sort of like in some ways it feels like a bit of a move. It's moving in a different direction than like the way that you'd normally produce a catalog. And that it's kind of like carnivorous. But it's also been like somehow really cathartic and like forward feeling in a way as well, which I wasn't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually why I'm here in New York at this moment, is to produce that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so last weekend was the pulping, and then the next 2 weekends will be screen printing and shrink wrapping.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Kate Hall is coming from LA, who's a screen printer, an artist, and also a screen printer that I work with, and Lucas, who designed it, is going to, So it's a big kind of group, pretty fun kind of thing.
I had a lot of fun. I've never pulped paper before.
It's definitely nice to be up to your elbows in like cold, pulpy mush.
I don't know if you saw me, but I was slowly becoming a book. I was covered. It was sticking to my arm hair.
I did notice that.
Yeah. Well, so you kind of alluded to this already, but one part of about this piece that I find really important is that you're sort of, well, on the one hand, it's sort of alluding to something like a steady state model of production, right? So no more extraction. We have what we have, and we figure out a way to use this.
Yeah.
The word sustainable is maybe a bit passé, but also applicable here.
Yeah.
But the other point is that you're using it to make sort of the predominant product of the art system besides art, right? So art produces artworks that are then sort of circulated in a market, but this needs to be documented in some way so that it could be sort of circulated in perpetuity, right?
Yeah.
But the fact to revert this model and to use collective workshops as a sort of a premise for gathering people in this way is really lovely. And so if you look at the 3 different pieces of the show together, it seems like in every different case, you're pointing at a different model of working or a different type of working, right? In the first part, it's the installation, which is sort of this very material, manual work that is typically hidden. Mm-hmm. The second case, it's the domestic space. I think you called the windows domestic scale, which is a nice way to refer to it, I think. And in this case, it's the collective workshop back at the brick and mortar of the museum.
Yeah.
Could you talk about maybe these different forms of labor and how you were thinking about work in the context of these 3 different pieces?
Yeah. And I also want to add in there like a type of work which is like one of looking at an exhibition.
Right, totally.
Especially like in the basement of the SculptureCenter when you're kind of walking around looking for work. It's like, it's very ambulatory.
Yeah.
And you're like, where's the art?
It's like a scavenger hunt. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think I love working with my hands, and I really love, like, I guess I enjoy working. And I think, like, there's something in there which is, like, about that, like, on a very, like, personal level. But I think about, like, this term termite art from Routine Pleasures, and it's sort of, like, thinking about, I guess, like the back side of the story. And like that's something where I guess I like to dwell. And accessing something we spoke about before, which is this sort of latent heat that like
Great
is
term.
present in the experience of most things, like this. How did that thing come to being, and who were the people involved? What was the community of the object? And
Right. I mean, that term latent heat for me is really, from our first conversation, I've not stopped thinking about it since we've been discussing this work.
yeah,
I don't know if you agreed with me earlier when I brought it up, but the way I took it, at least when you first said it, was sort of this potential to be found both in the work of producing something and in the product itself, right? It's this collective potential that hangs out, including attention, right? You just mentioned sort of the work of spectatorship and looking.
yeah.
But you also mentioned, you brought this up to me the first time as sort of a way to correct what you sort of correctly diagnosed, as far as I'm concerned, as like this very cliched form of addressing work that often just reinforces hierarchization and the veneration of the work ethic and these kind of things.
Yeah. I find that I'm really curious about the way that labor is represented in art or dialogue or in journalism, and that it's actually a very complex thing.
Right.
In different cultures, work is regarded differently. For instance, in Italy, it's almost seen as sacred. Like you don't disrupt the worker because they're doing something that's close to God, I think is like somewhere that goes. And so in America, I think the way that work is often regarded is that there's like a hierarchy, right? And that like people that work with their hands are the stereotype of like blue collar workers. And I think that, I guess I'm just interested in like breaking apart those categories or like ways of reading.
Right. And in terms of use value and the production of value in general, but use and exchange value, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The piece of Euclid that I wanted to bring up, or one of the two actually, is this really fantastic one she did at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in 73 or 74, where she basically created a chart that discussed the work of the artist, the museum conservator, and the janitor or the sanitation worker.
Yeah.
And she, through a series of propositions, got all three people to do the same thing, which is clean this case that a mummy was housed in. But even though all three workers were doing the same work, they were all getting paid differently. Right, so this sort of breaks open this hierarchization of labor that sort of values those that are privileged, or et cetera.
Yeah.
But the other piece of Euclid I wanted to bring up in relation to the collective workshops, and we talked about this before, is, you know, her famous manifesto from '69, the Maintenance Art Manifesto. The second part is less remembered, and in the second part, it's actually an exhibition proposal in which she proposed to live in the museum for a number of months. And while she was there to work with scientists and engineers to recycle waste from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about your piece and the way that it sort of responds to this sort of legacy of maintenance in art and maintenance in work is that not only are you producing a system, a product of the art system, you're also engaging the spectator in a completely different way, right? But you're still engaging with this museum as set of production. Yeah. Could you maybe talk about this or on this?
You mean the way that I'm involving the viewer in this story, or implicating them physically within it? Yeah. I think that we all have an innate understanding of work and like what it is to maintain and care and prepare for something. And I'm hoping to sort of like access that in people that visit the show. And rather than like a consumptive type of frame of mind where it's sort of thinking about whether you like or dislike something. And I think that relationship that we all have to some sort of work is like a very embodied one. And I think that's like quite an exciting part of sculpture, is that you're implicating the body through like walking around something. And like, I think that's, you know, something for me that takes it out of perhaps like more of like a theoretical politic around work. I probably am more in the camp of like thinking about an art experience or like the making of an object. Like that's probably how I approach it. But I'm like sort of open to whatever direction those conversations go.
Right. Well, you were mentioning earlier the mechanisms, or a specificity of the mechanisms that you're pointing to with the work.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder if I know that the part of the show, and you'll have to fill in the details, is moving to the Secession House in Vienna.
Right.
Maybe you could talk about how you're the specificity in two different places, or the specificity of these works as they move and things like this?
Yeah. So this group of bronze tools that's at the SculptureCenter, it's an edition of 2, and the second edition will be installed at Secession. And it's the same objects, but installed in a very different space, which is basically about that contradiction that we have exhibitions all over the world. There are certain parts that are the same, and there are certain, obviously the exhibitions are perfectly unique. And I guess like the way that we repeat a series of like preparations or operations or whatnot, but it's also different because the way that work is organized and perceived in New York in Long Island City is very different from that of Vienna, which is quite different attitudes towards work, and even bronze. Obviously, like the history of Art Deco and ornamentation in Vienna. So it's going to be really interesting presenting those same objects, but like they'll be, I think, the language that they're going to tie into is going to be quite a different one.
Right. And in a much smaller space, and a space that is categorically not this like post-industrial high ceilings.
Exactly, right.
Steel beams.
Right, which is actually folding nicely into the works and apartments, because the space I'm showing it in Secession is an old apartment where the woman that took care of the building lived.
Wow.
So it's kind of like nice kind of fold-ins, whereas the space of the SculptureCenter is the old pit where the trams were maintained. So it's kind of funny.
Completely different forms of maintenance and domesticity, if that term is appropriate.
Yeah, so it'll be an interesting install, I think.
But so you work with a lot of different type of spaces. I know that you have you spent a lot of time working with artist-run spaces and even co-founding one called the Varese Group.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, so I ran this space in my apartment for a while, and it was a year, and it was like high energy and very immersive, but I wanted to develop an artist-run space that was more sustainable and long-running.
Right.
So there's this group called the Varese Group, and it's a working group that meets in northern Italy every year. And it's generally the same people invited plus guests, and we all share work and cook together and just spend the week having these conversations and hanging out. And it was motivated by this funny thing where I go to Europe most of the years to do something, whether it be like an art fair or a biennial, like not me personally in them, to whatever the need is that year. And I wanted to sort of have a space that was like a territory that was artist run, that you weren't in a rush. Accommodation was free, meals were provided, people could kind of like draw energy from and then go and participate in these larger, more like hyper forms.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've also mentioned to me many times that sort of this experience with artist-run spaces, both in terms of organizing and collaborating, but also just being in these sort of very collectively minded spaces, right?
Yeah.
Has influenced your own approach to how you build an exhibition within an institution that's a lot less, let's say, collaborative, even though it might be.
Right. And different institutions are, more open than others to listening to that modality, and SculptureCenter has been absolutely wonderful, I have to say. Like they're so good at sort of responding to what artists are interested in. But I sort of like had this pretty formative experience of like being in involved in an artist-run space that was mostly older artists, and we all showed, and we all showed each other's work, and there was like we all advocated for the space, and we did the screen printing, the design, we set the galleries, we helped with install, and it was just very, I found it very nourishing and like very intense. So I sort of like, when I approach an exhibition, I like to think about it as like all the different sites of an exhibition, whether it be the wall text or the seating or the postcard or the being in the show itself. Like I like to think about it as part of the show. And I think that was really informative. And like also all the different people that, it ultimately becomes this quite complicated set of relationships between people you work with. And like,
right. This is something I'm particularly interested in, but we've talked about this many times now, and just how art provides a very specific form and context for analyzing a lot of these issues, right? I mean, it's clear that we were just talking upstairs about these type of collective spaces or a history of occupation or a history of squatting and sort of working together to produce something has been like thoroughly just decimated the last decades, at least in the States, and we're so atomized and alienated. And this is done very often through work, right? Through our,
Right.
We work longer and longer hours. It's harder and harder to get together. Even organizing a reading group nowadays takes like all your energy. And I wonder whether for you art is sort of this premier form for both accessing that collective potential, but also interrogating it and wondering about it. That's kind of what I got from the show at the SculptureCenter.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I agree with you because there is this there's a certain bite to the work and that there are these like blunt edges.
Right.
Maybe blunt edges where, courtesies, it's like,
right.
And it's like even like the legal language and the lease writer for the window washing, like there's these times where like the litigiousness or the realness, and I like that kind of like that acidity, but I guess something that I really love to think about is like support systems for work, for conversation, for other artists, for other writers. That's something that I just kind of really love to visualize and enact. And so I use exhibitions as a way of doing that. So in that way, like the approach is as much as the work that's sitting in the gallery is like, I don't know, like the larger project. And that's what is ultimately satisfying. It's like having a combination of the both.
Yeah, well, it's pretty beautiful to think that, because of the way the three different pieces are set up, is that as if you go to the show, and by going to the show, that doesn't mean going to the window cleaning. It means just standing in a gallery with either by yourself or with somebody that you're talking to and thinking about it, but you're considering the foundry worker, the artist, the museum organizer, the curator, et cetera. It's like all these different roles and forms and works that come together to make this.
And the three of you with me in the room right now.
Yeah. Which is really nice. I got to say, it was lovely to be pulping with you this weekend because it's like half of the staff in the museum was there, everyone covered in paper, chugging away. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to get dirty.
Yeah. Well, just to wrap things up, I should say that Fiona's show is up until July 29th at the SculptureCenter. Fiona, thanks so much for coming. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.